Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am super excited about today's webinar. If nothing else, it gives me a whole hour with two of my very favorite people in the world who have created amazing companies and have had really unique experiences in their journey with their companies and seeking partnerships and exits, and they have so much to share. So that's what I want you guys to do, is really hear from, again, two people who I respect tremendously as, well, first of all, human beings. Secondly, as people who have created amazing companies to serve their communities and have grown those exponentially, also have chosen different paths with their company. So you're going to hear from Kristen Waterfield, who chose to exit her company completely. And we want to learn more about her experience, how that went, what she might do differently, what things surprised her. And then from Andy Sherrard, who took a different path to gain a financial partner. So Andy partially exited and then was able to get a financial partner to fund what's some pretty amazing growth that we'll hear about. So thank you, Andy and Kristen, for being here.
Very excited. Thank you.
Andy, you're up. Talk to us about your beginning, which was a bit unique, and it's a great story in the industry where you thought you would go. Maybe you took a little bit of a shift along the way, and talk to us about your decision to partially exit and gain a partner and where you are now.
Excellent. Kathy, thank you. Excited to be with you. Yeah, I think the journey for me, the journey started quite a while ago now. So 1998 is when we opened our first location in Gainesville, Florida. From the earliest concept, it was a bit unique. And the way I've always described, our original location, it was like merging a YMCA, a children's museum, and a preschool all into one location. And candidly, the preschool is really the afterthought at the time. We were focused more on school age, and our concept, when I kind of merged those three things, while we had a traditional licensed preschool and a large after school program for up to 250 kids, membership was really the heart of what we were trying to create. And so we offered classes: karate, dance, gymnastics, music, theater, art, science, chess, computer, foreign language. And it was an all-inclusive membership, format that, a parent could pay one monthly membership fee and take as many classes as they wanted. So they didn't have to pick and choose and financially decide, which way to go. And so our approach really was, let's have this great, robust membership program, and then the handful of folks that wanted, preschool, after school, that was kind of the add-on component. There was a big play village area, tubes and tunnels to climb in, and rock walls, and building things areas, big giant Legos and dress up areas, and the art studio and science lab and all that great stuff. We were open 7 days a week, open on weekends for birthday parties, parent night out on Friday and Saturday night. We had general admission component. So there's just a lot of moving parts, to that. I think as we were toying with the idea, we're like, this is an amazing place for kids sitting empty all day. What do we do? It's really when we pivoted to the preschool component. And I think that, I was the sweat equity guy. So myself and Danny, my operating partner, we're still at it today. We were the sweat equity guys. So we, partnered with a husband-wife team, and they had some financial strength, but then we hustled. We did, had to raise $1.5 million through limited partnerships. And so we sold, $25,000 limited partnership units. And then we got bank loans for the building and the furniture, fixtures, equipment, and working capital, and probably burned through the working capital in, the first 7 days. And so it was just that grind. And we thought, we'd be amazing and, have 100 locations in 2 years. And, it was extremely difficult for those first, 4 or 5 years. Over time, we really started to understand the importance, from a development standpoint, of early childhood, and we really fell in love with that, and also just the reality of the operational reality of it's easier to manage. So we opened about 5 years later a satellite preschool only. First building was 33,000 square feet. Preschool was only 6,500 square feet. We're serving 1,000 plus kids in the first building, 120 in the second. And so we kind of focused in that direction. But every new school was a separate legal entity, different partnership groups. And so each one was like a startup and a grind. So we stayed that way for about 5 years. And then we jumped to, this was all in Gainesville, Florida. We jumped to the Jacksonville market, and that was kind of our first step away, call it an hour and a half. We repeated that first model with limited partnership units. So now I had 60 plus limited partners as we grew. Fast forward another 10 years or so, we entered the Orlando market, different creative financing there. We went into existing shopping centers, and the landlords were putting in, tenant improvement dollars to help us build out the buildings. And we used that money as the equity portion for SBA loans. And so we were, getting the SBA loan. So everything was just so hard. Every new location was so challenging. So we grew to about 8 locations in that 20 years, that first 20 years. And then 2018, Kathy, I met you at a conference, and I didn't really even know what I was looking for. I knew that we wanted to grow, and we wanted to grow faster and with some scale. But we knew we couldn't do it the way we were doing it. And so, I asked if you knew anybody, and you introduced us to a couple folks, and we ended up getting a private equity partner, Spire Capital, in 2018, and was able to exit all of our existing partners, which was not an easy thing to do. But our world from that moment completely changed. And so, again, 20 years to get to 8 locations. And today, that was about 7.5 years ago. That was the end of 2018. We sit at 86 locations today. So it's been a very different journey over the last 7 years. About half of those locations that we've added have been acquisitions. So we never bought anything before. Everything we did was we built on our own. So half of the 80, call it, we've purchased from existing schools, and the other half we built, either pure ground up, greenfield construction, or existing buildings, more of a brownfield. We converted the building, from something into a preschool, and that's how our journey is gone. So certainly can dive into any of those details, but on a big picture, that's kind of how we've arrived at this place.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but I just want to be sure everybody heard a couple of key components. So you had 65 partners.
Yeah.
Okay, so for anybody who thinks, because partnerships are, they're a great way to get started. You were very scrappy about how you started your business, as most every business owner I know was scrappy at some point. And so that was a lot to unwind, but it's possible. So it was probably a long, difficult process, but it was possible.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Also, I like your comments about remote growth, so growth into new markets. I should have said in the very beginning, you guys feel free to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and then we're going to leave time for questions in the end. But that's an interesting component that is quite a leap when you go geographically into a new market. So I'm sure that has some challenges. Do you want to comment at all on that?
Well, I think that, yeah, I mean, for us, even the idea of acquiring was a complete new muscle. We had never done that before. We were very brand focused, and so even for us, the idea of how do you acquire something and still, and it's still us. It's still, it's still operating with the ideals and the systems and the mindset that we had. But we knew once we partnered, we needed to do that. So the first couple were relatively close, and Kathy, you helped us with those. I mean, I think we acquired 3 locations in St. Augustine, which is just an hour and a half from home. 2 in Atlanta, which is 5 hours, but still a drive, right? An easy drive. And then we went the other direction down in the Palm Beach area and acquired 5 locations, and that was all within the first year. And so it was a 10 schools very quickly, and that literally took us right to COVID. And so I mean, I think we acquired the Palm Beach schools maybe 2 months before COVID started, and then we just had to hunker down like everybody else did. I think coming out of COVID, at the end of, I guess, December 22 is when we acquired. We made a real jump. So we jumped all the way from Florida to Minnesota, and acquired 4 amazing schools. But it was because we had a relationship, with the folks there, and an amazing team, and not just the owner, but the management team. So had been, I think many people are in different ownership groups that openly share information and best practice and things like that. And it was really a partner from there that allowed us to jump. And so we had confidence going very far from home because we had a relationship and a belief, with the management team that was there. And anytime you acquire anything, I mean, you want to keep the people. The people are the most important piece of the puzzle. So I think we spent a lot of time focusing on that. But that's what gave us confidence. We also, I think in a 7-day period of time, we acquired 13 schools, 8 in Atlanta, 4 in Minnesota, and another one in Florida. And so that was even, we almost doubled our growth, our footprint, in 1 week. And so that was part of the game. And I think that, if I think about just the phases of our growth, I mean, the first 20 years were just defining who we were and culture and, and learning how to deliver high quality education. I think these past 7 years have really been about understanding how to grow the company and still maintain, your values and your systems and do it geographically. We're now in 9 states. We have schools open in 9 states. We'll open in a 10th state this year. And I think we feel really comfortable with that now. So I think it's the focus has been how do you scale and how do you, provide feedback and knowledge and training, afar. And I think we've managed that pretty well. I think the last, year or so, we've really kind of refocused inside the school, inside the box, and say, how do we be as efficient as we possibly can, and successful as we possibly can inside the box. And so I think I really view that as kind of our 3rd phase of company growth. And that's where we are mentally. But I think the one word answer to your, how do you jump far? I mean, as long as you have great people, that's how you do it.
Right. Yeah. I was going to piggyback on that actually, because that was my experience as well, that acquisition of talent is so important as you grow, and the building out of talent. And you guys probably heard this, but just to highlight again, in 8 years, the organization has now grown from 8 schools to 86 schools. That's amazing. Congratulations. In addition to people, are there 1 or 2 other things that have been important in being able to scale that quickly?
Well, again, I think it comes down to, you can't system, right? I mean, there has to be, I think we even naively, the very first acquisition, we kind of went in and said, clearly you guys are successful. You've been doing everything right. We don't want to mess up what you've been doing. And so we're going to keep everything, in place. And I thought I was telling the truth at the time. And the reality is that that's not true. I mean, it's the things are going to change. And no matter what, even just how they get paid, who pays them is going to change. And so I think that, being true to who you are and trying to, we've been chasing systems forever. And I think that the standard, that I always, when I think about a system, what I'm chasing is a system should not be easy to follow. It should be hard not to follow. And that there's a huge difference between those two. easy is somebody, you tell it to them, they get it, they go, yeah, I see, I understand, but they can kind of do it their own way also. Hard not to follow means that they're going to burn less calories doing it our way than doing it their way. It literally is so easy. So we are not at that level everywhere, but that's what we aspire to be. And I think when you can create a program then and lay it out and articulate it in a way that people understand, I think that's huge. And then you got to love on them, right? I mean, again, the system comes back to the people, because the people are the ones that are implementing the system. So, I mean, we're trying to be small, even though as we're getting bigger. I mean, we always bring, when we acquire schools, we bring them here to Gainesville, and we just had a director meeting in Florida yesterday, and so mashing people together and getting them part of a big organization, I think for us has been a really important piece of the puzzle that we value, and we hopefully will be able to continue that as we continue to scale.
Great, thank you. I have two more questions, then we'll jump over and hear Kristen's story, who had a little more of a traditional exit. But I do want to address the fact that your new partner is a private equity company, and the private equity investment in our industry, in my opinion, has been such a gift. And I'll say more about that, but you were able to partially exit, so you were able to gain some value for part of your company and then keep some stock in the new entity, meaning you still have ongoing value. So was that part of the appeal for you?
Yeah, and so for us, I mentioned my partner Danny. I mean, from day one, I mean, we wanted to stay at it. So really, the overwhelming majority of the valuation of the sale went to our existing partners. So we needed to get a valuation that made them, that they bought off on and were comfortable exiting, because we didn't have any forced exit mechanism. They had to voluntarily choose to do it. So that was the challenge of our exit at the time. So, but for us, I mean, we were all in, Danny and I, and so that was a motivation for sure. But I think that and our partnership has been wonderful. We've been really able to continue to build the vision that we originally had, with a lot more resource and support. And there's dialogue, and we're challenging ideas and all of those things, which are healthy and good. But we were able to, partnerships can be hard, right? It can be your best friend, that can be hard. I mean, I come across a lot of, schools that are transitioning from parents to kids, and so now they're, parents are partnered with their kids, and that can be hard. And so any partnership can be challenging. But as long as you have shared values and you're agreeing on where you're going and how you're going to get there, it can be pretty special and pretty successful. If there's any misalignment, it can be miserable and slow everything down.
Sure.
So for us, we always wanted to stick around, and that was a big motivation for us.
Nice. But I will make a comment, because I'm finding myself explaining this in our market a good bit recently. My personal experience has been that when, and this is true of most investors, but it's especially true in my mind of private equity investors, that they immediately invest in the school and in the company. I have seen wages immediately increase. Generally, their employee benefit packages are stronger. They're going to make investments in the facility. They're going to make investments in systems, and they're going to make investment in operations and curriculum. So that has been my experience. I actually have seen you do that. As you've acquired schools, you will immediately raise pay for the team. So I've seen that in action. Will you agree with all that? Do you have any?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, what we're able to provide our team now, is significantly better than what we were able to do before. And having that sort of support and the resources And it's not even just compensation direct, it's even some of the support personnel to provide, additional, training or different departmental, support to make the front line, that director job, which we know is so challenging, and anything we can do to try to provide additional, make it slightly easier. I mean, if you can do that, then that's huge. And I think having a bigger resourced partner immediately can do those things, and you become more efficient. And so you try to, you try not to throw that into tuition. You want to be balanced, with that as well. But part of the idea of learning efficiencies is a way to absorb, some of the additional investments in people and benefits and things like that.
Right. Okay, well, thank you. I'm sure that our guest here will have some thoughts or questions about that. Again, you guys pop them in the chat or the Q&A, and I will monitor, but also we'll leave time at the end. Maybe I have a lot of things to ask, but Kristen, I would love for you to share your incredible story with our guest here, and then your path to exit was different and maybe a little more traditional than the path Andy took. Could you talk us through that and what your situation was and the decisions you made along the way?
Sure. First of all, I don't know that there's anything else I can say, since Andy said so much and has really added so much detail to sort of his journey. And I was very impressed in hearing that, Andy. So thank you for sharing. And Kathy, thanks for inviting me here, because I love to tell my story. And so to be able to understand how I got here, I just like to give a little bit of a backstory. And my story always starts with the same thing, which is, for anyone who wants to do anything, you have to be open to the possibilities. Because if I wasn't open to possibility, I wouldn't be speaking to you today, and I certainly wouldn't be known as the founder of the Malvern Schools. But at my core, I'm not really a founder first. I'm a teacher, which is why I love Boost so much, for sure. But I am a teacher first and foremost. So from when I was very young, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. So after college, I returned to my hometown and became a second grade teacher. That was the plan. It was a good plan, stable plan. And then on an ordinary Tuesday, regular old Tuesday, my life completely changed. I was visiting Philadelphia, and I was out for a run. And as I was running, I noticed a building under construction, and the sign outside said, the Goddard School. So that was 1991, and I'd never seen anything like this building. It was like a little house. It wasn't like a traditional school. And there was a man standing on a giant pile of dirt, kind of directing the construction. So I ran up to him and I said, hey, can you tell me about this school? And that man turned out to be the founder, the one and only original founder of the Goddard Schools, Joe Scandone. And what I thought would be a quick conversation with this gentleman turned into, a 2-hour discussion about education and entrepreneurship, children, families, and a vision. And at that time, early childhood education was not viewed the way it's viewed today. Infant education programs were still very new in concept. But the more he talked, the more intrigued I became. So at one point he said to me, I like that you're fresh out of college. I like that you're bringing fresh ideas. So sitting there on this pile of dirt on a Tuesday, he offered me a job. I'd never been in early childhood. I was that second grade teacher from my hometown. So I went back to my friend's apartment. I called my folks. I said, I want to move to Philadelphia. Essentially, I'm going to move to Philadelphia and join a startup company. There were 0 Goddard schools. There was 1 Goddard school at the time. I would make significantly less money. I would leave that stability behind, and I'd have to figure things out as it went along. But I believed in the vision that this man that I met shared with me about what early childhood could be like for children and for teachers and for families. So I moved. I furnished my apartment with the cheapest IKEA furniture I could possibly find. And I immersed myself in learning everything I could about early childhood education and about operations. At the time, there was no playbook, there was no internet. I was calling former professors. I was researching child development. I was looking at curriculum that at the time was considered the gold standard. I was helping to launch, I'll say that lightly, the company by helping to operate schools and having every hat possible, like many of our directors at our schools now have. I was also supporting franchisees because the Goddard School, as we know now, but then was a startup company that was franchise based. And I was learning business in real time as we go, as many people who buy into a franchise or start a business do. I was learning it in real time. And then somewhere along the way, I started really thinking, and I stopped thinking about myself as a teacher, just a teacher. And I started thinking like an entrepreneur. So over the 7 years of being a founding member of the Goddard School, the company grew from 2, I started when the second came online, to 72 locations across multiple states. So, those years being a founding member of the Goddard School, they taught me so much, so many lessons. And one of those important lessons that I learned in business is that growth alone does not create value. Quality does. So I saw firsthand what happened when some operators, not all by far, were unwilling to invest in their people, in their facilities, and in their programs. And I knew if I ever built something on my own, that I wanted to do it differently. So in 1998, I made that decision. I founded the Malvern Schools. And from the beginning, I made very intentional investments in quality and in safety and in the facilities, the educational programs, but most importantly, just like Andy said, in the people. Because in education, in this business, we know that it's our people that make our business great. So for 27 years, I and my team, many of them who have been with me from the beginning, we stayed committed to the principles that we had through every challenge. And there were many. A market shift, there was COVID, and the growth, right? The growth changes your company for good. And sometimes you need to look inward at the company and say, what are we doing here? But in addition to that, while I was building the company and my team, we also built a culture around giving. And I like to talk about this because I think it's important. One of my greatest partnerships was and continues to be with Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation. And my company and my culture raised $1.5 million for pediatric cancer. And I say this because it's part of our legacy as well, right? There's different parts of your legacy as a founder, as an owner, as a person in childcare. But eventually, like many founders, I reached a point where I said, I want to begin thinking about what the future of my company looks like and what an exit might look like. And I want to say this honestly, because I think many of you can relate to this. The first time I explored selling the business, I wasn't ready. And a couple of things I did. I used a general broker that was not in the education field at all, and certainly wasn't in early childhood education. And that first process taught me a lot. But when the valuation came back and I took a deeper look at my company, I realized something important, that I was kind of undervaluing what we had built and the market was undervaluing it too. So instead of selling at that moment, I made a different decision. And that decision was to reinvest in my company. And Andy touched a little bit on this, and I'm sure we'll talk about this with questions. But I took a certain amount of money and I invested in operations, my strength of operations, technology. At that time, we needed to reevaluate our technology. We invested further in leadership. We refined some systems, and we really continued to focus on things that we could do that would build long-term value, because I had a plan to create my exit. And that decision to reinvest in my company, that really changed a lot for me. And years later, when I began the process again, I knew for sure that I needed advisors who deeply understood the early childhood education space and what the unique value drivers were within our industry. And that expertise matters a lot. I mean, it mattered to me, it mattered to the evaluation. So this time I approached the process differently. I interviewed several firms before landing on Hinge, although that was pretty easy once I met Kathy and her team. And I chose to work with them because they didn't just understand, they understood the business ethics, but they also understood the educational, operational nuances behind the business, and that this was my legacy that I was getting prepared to pass on. So the outcome obviously was very different from the first experience that I attempted. And today I'm a year into, it's actually today, it's 1 year that I jokingly say I retired after staying on post sale. I did stay on post sale for 1.5 years, and happy to talk about that for sure. But my story is really not about having a perfect plan. It was really about my willingness to evolve, to look at my business, to take some of those risks, to learn during the whole process. The first time I wanted to go to market and the second time, I learned a lot about my business. And I had to recognize when it was time to build and improve so I could posture for selling. And I had to then recognize for me, like when it was time to let go. And I just knew when it was time. So I tell people all the time, like, be open to the possibilities, because sometimes those most transformational moments in life, right, and in your businesses, they happen on Tuesday, just a regular Tuesday. So, I ended up selling to a strategic partner. And, we can certainly, Kathy, you can ask me some questions about that. I'm happy to answer some things more specifically, but I wanted to give just more of a full picture as a founder myself of kind of how I got to this moment.
I love your full circle Tuesday story. That's quite amazing. Also, love the intentionality around your preparation for growth and exit, and realizing that the company and your people deserved the opportunity to be prepared in a way that made them successful afterwards. You mentioned people and systems, you added to your people, you expanded skills, you grew systems, you grew your footprint to 30 schools when you exited?
29.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there other parts of your preparation that are noteworthy to mention? Is there anything that maybe thinking back on it, you would have better prepared for?
That's a great question. It's interesting, as I said, the first time around prepared me to kind of understand better what I needed the second time around, right? And I think you need to be able to tell your story really well. And because you're going to meet with a lot of people that are going to try to get more information and poke holes in different things. So you really need to be prepared, and you really do need to prepare your closest team members for what's going to happen, because they are going to be part of the process. They were part of my process. They did presentations to potential partners and buyers. And so they need to be prepared as well. So I feel like once I was sure that the decision was made and I found the person and the firm I wanted to work with, it was really crafting that, being very active in the due diligence. I don't really have anything that I can say during the process I would change. I mean, my team felt really comfortable along the way, and that was incredibly important to me.
Love that. Really good question that piggybacks on that. How hands-on were you in the day-to-day operations before you sold?
Certainly early on. Whew, you betcha. Every day, all day. But as I built that infrastructure, right, that administrative infrastructure, there was that next layer, that person that handled the educational programming, a very solid long-term CFO, human resources team, an operations and quality team. So, I mean, in the reporting up way, certainly there were meetings and things like that. But I was aware of what was going on, of the daily things that I needed to know all the time, and constantly briefed, I would say. And then, sometimes unfortunately, sometimes things go sideways, and that's the part you have to get really involved in. And those are the things that are the hardest to do, I would say. They were for me, at least.
Right. Right. And so, again, just to distinguish for our guests here, that Kristen's path was to exit completely, although she did a transitionary period that I want to ask you about next, even though that's a bit unusual. Most people who exit immediately exit, and that's most buyers' preference, so that they start with the team immediately with a clean slate. But whereas Andy wanted to accomplish exiting from a complicated partner structure. So one of our guests asked if you still have all those partners, Andy.
No, that was part of the transaction. We exited those partners.
Yeah, so that's one thing he wanted to accomplish, was to separate himself from the partners, and they did quite well because Andy did quite well. But to simplify his structure, and then his mission was to stay in and grow, where Kristen had different personal goals and where she was heading. But you did take the interim step to stay on for a bit. Can you talk more about what that looked like? Was that a good decision? I'm sure things changed for you. Would you have changed that now? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think my mission was, yes, to sell and exit for sure, but I wanted to make sure that my people were taken care of. So when you go through this process, you can do it on terms that mean something to you, that are important to you. And Andy referenced this too, right? Things are going to change. That is just the way it is. You're selling your company, or you're partnering with someone else. So things are going to change, but you can have terms when you're, going through this process. One of my terms was to ensure that my executive level staff that had been with me for a very long time had a year of safety, and they could then, blaze their own path, whatever happened. But yes, I stayed on. And part of the reason I stayed on and was asked to stay on was because the strategic buyer had never acquired such a large group. And so 27 active centers, and then 2 under construction and development. So they'd never acquired such a thing. So they really didn't have it fully flushed out. And so having me on and being able to continue to run the brand was really their objective and an ask of me. And my initial thought was, yes, I can do that because I can continue to, keep it elevated, keep the brand elevated, make sure my people are okay, my families are okay, and all those types of things. So that was my initial reason. They were very respectful of me. I don't know how that goes for most people, but they were extremely respectful of me. Absolutely used the wisdom that I had to offer, not just for the Malvern schools, but their other brands as well. And Andy had some interesting points to talk about how when you merge with another company, they bring a lot of resources. And I would say that's true. But if your company is run well and is sophisticated, they might take some of your ideas and resources. And that was very fulfilling to see that we have positioned ourselves so well with 27 locations that a lot of our operations and practices were then adapted to the new company. So as an owner, I wouldn't have seen that if I would have exited likely. So I did get to see some of the behind the scenes things that were being exchanged. And that was really actually quite wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I always have felt you always want to hear from an investor or buyer that they recognize that when you come together, whether it's a large company acquiring one or two schools, that they recognize that you are probably doing something better than they are, and they're willing to blend those. So I have a question for both of you guys that I love, but I want to clarify this again, just so you guys understand. Andy originally was not in a private equity partnership. He had 65 individual partners in his schools. And one of his goals was to help them exit and continue to grow in a simpler structure. So he sold part of his company to buy those partners out. And now his business partner is the private equity company. He does still partially own the business. And the second part of that question is, are you running the day-to-day operations, Andy?
Well, in the same way that Kristen described. So yeah, I'm still CEO of the company, and this is where I come to work every single day. So from that perspective, yes. But just as Kristen described, when we have our various departments, obviously over time we've built up regions. So we have regional managers and trainers and sales support and that sort of thing. So, yes, I'm part of the day-to-day. But as far as well, I mean, we did a training with all our directors yesterday, and I was there with them and love doing that. But it's a big group of people. But yeah, this is my job.
When there are 86 schools, day to day just looks different than it does if you're taking the phone call about someone that's out sick that day, or you're on a strategic level. Those are two different things. So I love this next question. I would love for you both to respond to this. John is wondering, what were some of your, on the corporate level, some of your first hires as you went from a company of 2 to 3 to a company of 8 to 9, 10? And I love that question because to me, that is the tipping point at which you need to begin to think about a bigger structure. And what did that look like for you guys?
I outsourced a lot of my people initially, right? I couldn't have a human resources department. I used an accounting firm initially to manage all the business aspects of things. What I brought on first was a safety and compliance person that could be out at the school level, and had multiple hats, not just that. So I needed somebody who understood early childhood education, who understood regulations, who understood safety and compliance, not just at the state levels. We were in 2 different states, but at what the Malvern schools compliance points were. So that was what I needed, to someone on the ground to support the schools, to make sure we're hitting all those quality markers so that we could then focus on another school, right? You don't want to just keep adding schools without making sure you're doing it right with the schools you have now. So that's what I did first. And that person stayed with me the entire time until I sold.
Yeah, I think similar situation. I mean, if we go back to, your story, Kristen, which was great. You came from the education arena. I didn't. At the time, both my original partner, we didn't have kids. We weren't married. We had no education background whatsoever. We actually came from the fitness industry, but we were managing a very large 20,000 member gym, fitness center. I mean, but you wore shirt and tie to work people out. I mean, it was a very sophisticated place. And I think that our approach was, we didn't know how to run a preschool, but we knew how to create a great culture and a great environment and a great, and understood systems. And so our goal was to go out and find great people and turn them loose to do great work, right? And I think that approach kind of continued. So I think as you expand from that 2, 3 to 8, 9, or 10, I guess I view it the same departments that you'd think about, Kristen's mentioned human resource department. You're obviously going to have accounting and finance. You're going to have legal compliance. It's whatever you're not doing, you need to kind of, lean on folks that have greater expertise. I mean, for us, we needed a little bit of, I said we needed like some maturity, back then. And so we hired my younger sister, to come in, and as the legal, she was an attorney. So she came in and brought that legal and compliance and systemic approach to human resources and making sure that we were, doing everything the proper way. So I think there was a human resource component. Obviously training was a big piece of the puzzle. At some point, you're going to be looking at, a regional management issue. It really matters tremendously how close those schools are to each other. If you can visit 4 or 5 schools in one day, and spend 2 hours at each one because they're 15 minutes apart, that's a very different structure than schools that are 2, 3, 4 hours apart from each other in one day to visit one school. And so I think that part could vary. But if you think of the traditional departments that any company needs, and then what do you like doing and what do you not like doing, and just bringing in someone that has greater expertise, in those areas where that's not your bag.
Well, it's really interesting because when I started, human resources looked a lot different, right? Now you really do need more protection and advisement from the experts. And I always say, surround yourself with people who are way smarter than you, especially in these specialized areas like Andy's referring to. You want to make sure that not only do you protect yourself, but the people that are on the front lines, your directors and all those people, they're making good decisions and they have someone to go to speak to. Probably aside from this person who did education, et cetera, by the time I got to like school 8, I couldn't continue to outsource the financial piece. So I did bring in like a CPA before it became a CFO, but I did bring in someone that really just focused on the business of the Malvern School. We did a lot of self-funding. So I had to be sure that our books were in great shape before I continued my growth strategy, which is sort of what Andy referred to, right? My growth strategy was to be the largest private preschool in the Philadelphia region so that I could use like advertising and marketing and all those types of things in the most efficient way.
Right. Yeah, you guys called on some important concepts, I think, and I think for some physicians, it makes sense to continually evaluate, is this more effective to outsource or to bring in-house? And also, Andy mentioned something that I found really important in growing a company, which was, what am I good at, or what are we good at? What talents do we have? And then bring in the functions that we weren't very good at. I'll also mention that I'm seeing a lot of companies now adding positions for driving enrollment and that whole inquiry to enrollment process. So they're adding additional positions there, and also support for directors in the front processes of hiring. So those are 2 areas that we're seeing. We have probably time for one more question, and I want to be sure that I ask you guys to talk about how the process itself went for you, what you found to be the most difficult. Was there something looking back on it now that you might have done differently, or could you have been better prepared? What surprised you the most? Andy, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, our process was not really traditional. I mean, we didn't really have a competitive process, right? So I mean, Kathy, as you know, I went to you. I had a pretty unique situation. I didn't even know if it was possible and I was not familiar with private equity and how it worked. And so, you introduced me actually to 2 different people, and one kind of was, our model was very different because of those, at the time, of our 8 locations, 4 of them were these big, 30,000 square foot buildings with membership and preschool and after school and birthday parties. So we were kind of non-traditional coming from the outside. And so that was the other scary piece. And so, but you connected with us with a group that believed in us, and we just made it work. And I think, the most important piece, the hardest part for me was getting all of our partners to agree to move on. But we needed the partner, Spire Capital. They were incredibly patient and recognized the challenge of that. And it took a while. And so I think for them, the grace in allowing that to happen was very much appreciated. As far as the due diligence, side of it, I think we were pretty tight with our information, and so that wasn't really a challenge. It was more of navigating the complexity of our structure.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And Kristen, same thing. What might you do differently? What?
Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer to what I might do differently, because it actually went pretty well, but and that would probably take a long time. But I will tell you, the hardest thing for me, I'm pleased to report, was that there were 10 seriously interested buyers to start with. And some were private equity, some were strategic. And so I would say the hardest was whittling it down to the 3 finalists, which is sort of where we ended up. And then sitting down and looking at their offers, and knowing that, of course, the financial piece was important, but there were other parts to the sale that were important to me, and trying to align with a buyer that I felt would be a good culture fit, because the initial plan for all of them was not to change the name. They were buying the strength of the name. They were buying the strength of the product, of the program. So they wanted to keep that. And so that element looked the same, but there was a lot of other nuances that looked differently. So probably the hardest part was choosing the buyer. And I'm happy with my choice. But you always have moments of questioning, did I do the right thing? Maybe I should have chose the other. But I was really glad I had choices. I mean, I had a lot of choices. Then I had 3 really solid choices.
I think that just jumping in there, I think that if I view it kind of as a buyer now, I think Kristen hit on 3 things. It's like, I don't know if we call them the 3 Ps or not, but I mean, obviously there's going to be the price, and sometimes that's all people care about. Just high price wins, right? Second part is the process, and I think the process does surprise people with how many questions are asked, how many documents need to be created in so many different parts of their life. Attorneys get involved. Everybody has an attorney that needs to represent them and protect them, but some attorneys are more protection attorneys and some are more deal-making attorneys, and so what's the process going to look like? And then the third is kind of the product, meaning what happens when you're done. And so Kristen's, it sounds like her situation was they were keeping the brand. So that's a big deal. Others may not be. But how does the organization look like for your people afterwards? And I think when people evaluate, they can care about all 3, and sometimes they do. Sometimes they just care about price. Sometimes, they'll sacrifice price for what happens after. And so I think, for each person to kind of even prioritize those 3 things, you can tell them, Kathy, which group is going to have the easiest process. I think you have great insight into that. But the other 2 things, I think it's an individual decision that's an important one to reflect on and kind of decide as you're evaluating who's that perfect partner for you going forward, whether you're exiting or sticking around.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to that because I know we're at time, but the process, I would add that the 4th P is people. And I know you have that under the actual product, but the process itself, you learn so much about your own business. You really learn things as you're going through the process. But your company, Kathy, Hinge, was very helpful in guiding us through the process to formulate the story, the outward facing story that we needed to tell, even in some areas that weren't necessarily fully developed or that had, some holes in them, like just really being forward facing about it and talking about it and framing the areas that we think this buyer can improve and can help the organization. So I agree with all those things that Andy said, and I think I should use that going forward.
Yeah, I think in a lot of years of helping people exit, I have maybe once or twice had a seller care more about, not that it's not important, but care more about the money they were getting than who was going to continue their culture and care for their teams and families and children. And it's the thing that keeps me here, only here. I know we're over time, but I have to ask this quick question. Any advice? Is there one thing you would say to a person that's considering an exit?
Talk to Kathy.
I did not ask him to say that.
That's true. But be ready from a process standpoint and from a emotional standpoint.
That's great. What to add to that, Andy?
Yeah, I think that, recognize that, you are who you are, right? So, you are, there will be questions about every aspect of what your business. Clearly you're successful. If you're looking to exit and sell, you're doing something right, but we all do it differently, everybody. And so I think that, be proud of the parts that you do well, but, be straight about the parts that you don't focus on or don't prioritize. And because, I think to Kristen's point, it sounds like, like I hadn't really thought about that, but if Kathy says, yeah, but we always have a page talking about this thing. Well, Kristen was able to be successful without that magic piece of the puzzle, and we all do that. So I think it's, don't put frosting on anything. Your cake is good, sell the cake, but I think in personal reflection, as you're contemplating what's good, what's bad, I do think that is very healthy exercise to do, whether you're legit thinking about it today or thinking 3 to 5 years from now. It's a great exercise.
Wonderful comment. Quick answer to a question. Andy created his brand, as did Kristen. Andy's brand is O to B Kids, 86 schools strong. Kristen founded and ran the Malvern School. So sorry.
To that question though, we do rebrand everything except we do have Cedar schools that we kept in the greater Atlanta region and as well. So those are the two brands that we operate. We're proud of both of them, obviously.
Yeah, you both touched on brands. I wish we had more time to talk about that, but typically an acquirer or investor will maintain a brand that they feel like has strong market recognition. They won't want to damage that. And then sometimes it's healthy to change your brand. So there are different approaches there. And some people feel very strongly about not changing their brand, and that's okay too. That's a lot of people's big consideration when they sell the company. But I hope that you guys gained a lot of great information here. As you can see, these two people, along with others in our industry, have created programs that have increased accessibility for families. They have grown teams. They have stabilized their communities with resources for workers. And I just have so much respect for the work that you guys have done and are doing, and really appreciate you joining today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.